Have you ever just completely and unapologetically loved a movie that the critics absolutely despised?
Oh, totally. We all have that one movie.
Right. Like, think about it. You sit down in the theater, you laugh, you defend it to your friends, you have a genuinely great time, but then you open up a review and you find out that the world's most respected cinema experts consider this thing you enjoyed to be an offense to the art form.
It is, I mean, it's one of the most fascinating phenomena in pop culture.
Yeah.
That really sharp, jarring disconnect between highbrow critical consensus and the actual on-the-ground experience of someone who just wants to sit in the dark and be entertained for 90 minutes.
Exactly.
Because we like to pretend that quality is this objective science, but when you look
Yeah.
at the historical reception of certain films, that theory just crumbles.
And welcome to the deep dive, by the way, because today our mission is to examine a single Wikipedia article about a piece of media that perfectly, hilariously embodies this exact paradox.
It really does.
We were looking at a 1971 Walt Disney comedy directed by Vincent McEvedy. It is called The $1 Million Duck, which was also known in some releases as $1 Million Duck.
Right, they had a couple titles for it.
Yeah, and we're going to unpack how a seemingly silly family film about an irradiated waterfowl became this wild, contradictory flashpoint in cinema history.
It's a film that somehow managed to earn major prestigious award nominations while simultaneously infuriating legendary critics so much that they literally physically walked out of the theater.
It is glorious. And just to set the tone for you, this isn't just a movie about an animal. It's this bizarre 1970s time capsule.
Oh, absolutely.
When I was looking through these notes, I realized the premise of this film. Well, it's like finding a treasure chest of gold, but the gold is covered in radioactive applesauce.
That is a very specific image.
Right. Actually, you know what? A better way to put it is that judging the $1 Million Duck by the same metrics as something like, say, The Godfather, it's like taking a micrometer to a bouncy castle.
I love that.
You're using this instrument of extreme precision to measure something that was built entirely for loud, clumsy fun.
That is a perfect way to frame it. Because on the surface, yes, it's a bouncy castle, it's a slapstick family comedy.
Yeah.
But when you look at the actual narrative mechanics, it accidentally becomes this profound exploration of Cold War economic paranoia, the fragility of the suburban family, and government overreach.
Okay, let's slow down, because to understand this bizarre legacy, we can't just skip to the end. We have to understand the inciting incident.
Right, the setup.
And I promise you, if you haven't seen this, you cannot predict how this plot kicks off.
Yeah.
We meet our main character, Albert Dooley, played by Dean Jones.
A classic Disney leading man.
Totally. So Albert is a scientist, but he is seriously struggling to keep his head above water financially.
Right, and the film establishes a very specific contrast here to ground the story. We learn that Albert was actually his college valedictorian. He was the guy everyone told, you are going to go far in life. So right from the jump, you have this underlying tension of unfulfilled potential colliding with intense everyday financial pressure.
So money is tight. His wife, Katie, played by Sandy Duncan, decides she is going to help cut down the household budget by making her own applesauce.
Which is a choice.
A terrible choice, as it turns out.
Yeah.
Because she completely botches the recipe. It is entirely inedible.
Which is actually a point where the film's modern reception bleeds into the plot. Critics, both then and now, were pretty brutal about this characterization.
Oh, really?
Yeah, modern critics like Scott Weinberg of DVD Talk specifically roasted the writing for Sandy Duncan's character. He argued that she is written to be, and I quote, stupid as a stone.
Ouch.
Yeah, the film plays her lack of basic domestic skills as a hilarious punchline, which is a very dated, frustrating trope.
Wait, hold on. So the studio thought a story featuring a struggling valedictorian husband and a wife whose sheer incompetence drives the plot was just breezy, harmless comedy.
Exactly. It highlights the disconnect we're talking about. The studio thought it were funny. The critics found it borderline insulting.
Wow.
But that botched applesauce is the engine of the entire plot.
Yeah.
Katie gives the ruined, budget-saving applesauce to Albert to take to work.
Right.
Albert gets to his laboratory, realizes he can't eat it, and throws it in the trash.
And to the duck.
Yes.
Albert is currently running tests on a duck at work. And this duck, whose name is Charlie, despite explicitly being a female duck, wanders over,
Yeah.
eats the discarded applesauce out of the trash, and then just casually wanders into a radiation lab.
As one does.
Right, as one does in a 1970s science facility.
Workplace safety protocols were apparently not a high priority in this cinematic universe.
Not at all.
So the duck gets heavily irradiated.
Okay, let's unpack this. The recipe for a magical creature here is literally just bad, budget-saving applesauce plus workplace radiation.
Pretty much.
That feels like the most chaotic origin story ever. I mean, Captain America gets a highly calibrated super soldier serum. Charlie the Duck gets Katie's terrible cooking and some loose gamma rays.
What's fascinating here is how the film is essentially taking an ancient narrative structure, Aesop's fable of the goose that laid the golden eggs, and updating it to reflect 1970s nuclear age anxieties.
Oh, I see.
If you look at the original fable, the magic just exists. It's an unexplained phenomenon.
Right, it's just magic.
But here, the magic is a direct causal result of scientific hubris, domestic frugality, and atomic radiation. It grounds a fairy tale in the very real atomic-era fears that people were actually living with at the time.
And the mechanics of this power are completely ridiculous. Because of the radiation exposure, Albert is ordered to get rid of the duck.
Oh, nada.
But his son, Jimmy, played by Lee Montgomery, has been begging for a pet. So Albert brings the radioactive duck home to his kid.
A questionable parenting choice, to be sure.
It's just a little light radiation in the living room. But this is where they discover the duck's new ability. Whenever a dog barks, it triggers a Pavlovian response in Charlie.
The classic conditioning experiment.
Yeah.
But instead of salivating, the sound of the bark causes the duck to lay an egg. And not a normal egg. The yolk of this egg is solid gold.
Solid gold yolks on demand. Bark at the duck, get goals.
Yeah.
So naturally, Albert, Katie, their son Jimmy, and Albert's friend Fred, who is played by Tony Roberts, in his actual film debut, which is a great piece of trivia.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, they decide to keep this quiet. They start harvesting these golden yolks and selling them to pay off their debts.
And this is where the narrative transitions from a quirky domestic comedy into a completely different genre.
It really shifts gears.
Because if you think about the mechanics of what they're doing, a family secretly generating endless, untraceable gold cannot go unnoticed for long.
To the U.S. government. Specifically, their nosy neighbor, Mr. Hooper, played by Joe Flynn.
Oh,
Yeah, Hooper works as a bureaucrat from the Treasury Department. He gets highly suspicious of the Dooleys' sudden wealth and starts spying on them.
though his espionage is handled entirely through physical slapstick.
Oh, it's peak cartoon logic. He's hiding up in a tree, spying on the Dooley house, and his own wife, Eunice, yells at him from the ground.
Right.
It startles him so badly he falls right out of the branches. But despite being incredibly inept, Hooper actually succeeds. He witnesses Charlie laying a golden yolk, and he sees Albert and Fred celebrating.
And this changes the entire scale of the movie. Hooper goes to his boss at the Treasury Department, Rutledge, played by James Gregory.
Yeah.
Initially, Rutledge thinks Hooper is delusional, but Hooper lays out a very serious, logical argument about the economic upheaval that an easy and infinite supply of gold could create.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We go from a family selling egg yolks to a direct order from the Oval Office.
It escalates so fast.
The rumor travels up the chain of command, phone call by phone call, until Rutledge is on the phone with President Nixon himself.
Which is wild for a Disney movie.
Nixon personally orders the capture of the duck. It's like if your weird weekend side hustle suddenly threatened to destabilize the global economy.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's wildly revealing about the time period. Imagine you are a viewer in 1971.
Okay.
You go to this Disney movie to escape the news. But the news was dominated by massive economic anxiety.
Right, inflation and everything.
Exactly. The United States was dealing with rampant inflation. And crucially, and we're just outlining the historical facts here to show why the film works the way it does, 1971 was the exact time period when the country was undergoing the Nixon shock.
The Nixon shock.
Yes, the transition completely away from the gold standard, fundamentally changing how money worked.
So the idea of gold suddenly flooding the market wasn't just a fantasy problem, it hit a very raw nerve.
Exactly. Let's explain the mechanism of the fear here. If currency is tied to gold and a private citizen can suddenly manifest infinite gold in their living room, that citizen effectively controls the value of the US dollar.
Yeah.
It would cause hyperinflation. So the government's terror in this film is actually economically sound. It's a slapstick comedy masking a geopolitical economic crisis.
That is wild. But while the government is panicking on a macro level, Things are completely falling apart on a micro level for the Dooleys.
Yeah, the family dynamic.
Albert gets consumed by greed. The former valedictorian who couldn't pay his bills suddenly has limitless wealth, and he completely loses his moral compass. He stops spending time with his son, Jimmy, to focus entirely on the duck.
It is the tragic flaw from Aesop's fable manifesting perfectly. The greed blinds him to his actual family.
Hmm.
And this sets the stage for the film's physical climax, forcing the government pursuit and the fractured family dynamic to collide.
Right. So Treasury Department officials, led by Hooper, show up at the house to seize the duck for national security. Jimmy sees them coming.
He takes action.
He grabs the duck, climbs out his bedroom window, and manages to hitch a ride with a couple of teenagers in a hot rod.
A very classic 1970s cinematic trope, rebellious teens in a hot rod outrunning the squares.
Totally. The government agents chase them, and this leads to a genuinely wild stunt. Jimmy somehow ends up suspended high in the air on a ladder that is stretched directly between two parking garages.
It's so dangerous.
He is dangling over the city, clutching this million-dollar duck.
And this becomes the ultimate crucible for Albert. He arrives at the scene, sees his son in mortal danger, and tries to convince Jimmy to reach out and grab his hand before the ladder snaps.
But Jimmy refuses.
Right.
Because Jimmy genuinely believes that Albert doesn't care about him anymore. He thinks his dad is only risking his life to save the gold-producing duck.
Yeah.
For a movie with such a goofy premise, that is a surprisingly heavy emotional beat.
It forces Albert to make a definitive choice. The ladder begins to break, Jimmy is terrified, and in that split second, he realizes his father is genuinely there for him, not the gold.
And he saves him.
Yes, Albert pulls Jimmy to safety just as the ladder falls.
A beautiful, triumphant family reunion, which is immediately ruined because the second they are safe, Albert is arrested by the Treasury officials. And his crime: owning gold as a private citizen.
Which again touches on historical realities. For decades, following executive orders in the 1930s, it actually was illegal for U.S. citizens to hoard gold.
Oh, really?
Yes, and the film uses this to force a final confrontation in a courtroom. Albert is facing federal charges and realizes the only way to prove he isn't a criminal mastermind is to show the judge the absurdity of the situation.
He has to prove the duck is the source. So they bring the duck into the courtroom. Mr. Hooper, the nosy neighbor, tries to trigger the magic by barking at it, but he fails.
Of course.
So Albert steps up. He barks at the duck. Charlie lays an egg into a glass right in front of the judge. The tension is at its peak. The judge breaks the egg open, and it is just a regular, yellow, completely normal yolk.
The effects of the radiation had conveniently worn off at the exact second they needed them to.
So what does this all mean? Wait, the government literally arrests a man for a federal crime, triggering a national security panic that reaches the President of the United States, and the entire tension of the film is resolved by the radiation just magically expiring.
Pretty much.
It's the ultimate cinematic reset button. There are zero consequences.
This raises an important question about what the narrative of this era actually valued. You have to look at what the film prioritizes.
Okay.
It introduces a massive geopolitical economic crisis, but it has absolutely no interest in solving it. The courtroom scene isn't about economics or justice. It is entirely about the restoration of the nuclear family.
Because the magic is gone, the judge dismisses the charges due to lack of evidence.
Exactly. Albert turns to his family and delivers the moral. The gold was nice, but at least we have our pet duck, and family is more important than wealth.
He learned his lesson. But the judge actually gets the final word of the movie, and it is fantastic. He leans over the bench, looks at young Jimmy, and says, "If that duck ever lays another golden egg, bury it quick."
The judge ordering them to literally bury the gold is the perfect metaphor for how Disney wanted audiences to treat this movie.
How so?
Just bury the implications, have fun, and don't think too hard about the geopolitical consequences.
But the film critics of 1971 absolutely refused to do that.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the reception. Because the behind-the-scenes trivia and the way the real world reacted to this movie are just as chaotic as the on-screen plot.
To understand the critical whiplash, we should first look at the production itself. Disney brought a bizarre level of earnestness to this project.
I am obsessed with this detail. Disney held open casting calls for the role of the duck.
They really did.
They literally auditioned ducks at the studio. The winner was a duck named Webfoot Waddle. And they had understudies. Two runners-up named Jennifer and Carlos were kept on set as stand-ins for Webfoot Waddle.
It highlights the technical effort Disney was pouring into the formula, but that formula was colliding with a massive shift in cinematic history.
Yeah, the timing was tough.
You have to remember, the early 1970s was the dawn of the new Hollywood era. This was the time of gritty, realistic masterpieces. Critics were championing complex, dark narratives.
Right.
And right in the middle of that, Disney releases a movie about a duck laying gold when a dog barks.
And the critics took it personally. Let's talk about Gene Siskel, one of the most respected film critics in history.
A legend.
Throughout his entire multi-decade career sitting through thousands of movies, Gene Siskel only walked out of a theater 3 times. Once for a 1980 slasher film called Maniac, once for the 1996 Chris Farley comedy Black Sheep, and the third time was The $1 Million Duck.
He was so fundamentally offended by what he was watching that he physically abandoned the screening.
Yeah.
And his famous counterpart, Roger Ebert, was just as brutal. Ebert went on the record calling it one of the most profoundly stupid movies I've ever seen.
Profoundly stupid. That is a heavyweight insult. And as I mentioned earlier, modern critics like Scott Weinberg echo that sentiment today, calling it easily one of Disney's worst live-action family comedies ever.
If you look at review aggregators today, it sits at a dismal 17% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 45 on Metacritic, leaning heavily negative.
But here is the massive paradox. How do we reconcile this intense critical hatred with what actually happened?
It's a great question.
Because Gene Siskel is fleeing the theater in disgust, but audiences loved it. The movie was a genuine financial success, bringing in $5.1 million in North American rentals. And even crazier, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association looked at this film and gave it Golden Globe nominations.
2 of them. Both Dean Jones and Sandy Duncan were nominated for Golden Globes for their comedic acting.
Are you serious? The critics call it profoundly stupid, and the Golden Globes say, let's put them on the ballot.
It is a stunning divide, but if you analyze the psychology of it, it makes sense.
Okay, tell me how.
Critics like Siskel and Ebert were evaluating the film based on narrative structure, thematic depth, and intellectual rigor. By the metrics of high art, it fails. But the Hollywood Foreign Press Association was recognizing something entirely different: the genuine technical skill required to pull off physical comedy.
So they were rewarding the sheer effort.
Exactly. Selling a premise this absurd to a theater full of children requires tremendous comedic timing, physical commitment, and earnestness.
Yeah, that's fair.
Dean Jones and Sandy Duncan were given incredibly silly material, acting opposite a duck named Webfoot Waddle, but they fully committed to the reality of the scene. Revisionist critics today argue that judging this film alongside serious 1970s cinema is a fundamental mistake.
Because it wasn't made for them.
Right. Its targeted appeal was always kids. If you accept the essential silliness of the bouncy castle, it succeeds at exactly what it set out to do.
It's the ultimate example of knowing your audience. The critics walked out, but the families bought tickets, and the actors got to be Golden Globe nominees. I think that's why we love diving into the history of things like a critically panned 50-year-old Disney movie. The pristine masterpieces are great, but sometimes these weird little forgotten corners of pop culture yield much more fascinating stories.
Oh, without a doubt.
The Godfather didn't have open casting calls for poultry, and it didn't make Gene Siskel flee the building.
It certainly did not. It forces us to ask how we measure the true value of media. Is it the critical consensus or the joy it brought to its intended audience?
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to mull over. What if the true legacy of a piece of media isn't actually its objective quality, but its sheer audacity? Think about the movies coming out right now that the critics are absolutely tearing apart. Consider what seemingly bad movies from today might spark intense debates or be looked back upon fondly by revisionist critics 50 years from now.
It's a fun thought experiment.
Because who knows? Maybe half a century from now, someone will be recording their own deep dive about the hidden genius of today's biggest critical flops. It's all about perspective, and sometimes you just have to appreciate the radioactive applesauce for exactly what it is.